New players in Zenless Zone Zero usually ask two things at the same time: who works well together and which character fixes their account. The problem is that most answers jump straight to a premium lineup without explaining the mechanics that make it work, which creates the false idea that team building is rigid. That assumption comes from games like, unfortunately, Honkai Star Rail, where most optimized teams are fairly fixed and copying a template is usually fine, but ZZZ is built around conditional passives that can be satisfied in multiple ways, so stacking the same element and calling it synergy misses how the system actually works. As always, this short is sponsored by LOOTBAR. If you're playing Zenless Zone Zero or any Hoyoverse game, LOOTBAR is a global top-up platform that lets you buy in-game currency faster and usually cheaper than in-game. It's fully official, super easy to use, and the best part is the discounts, especially if you top up often or during banner seasons. If you're planning pulls or just want to save some cash, check out the link in the description and give LOOTBAR a look. The starting point for every team should be core skills and additional abilities, not tier lists. Once you treat those requirements as the structure of the team, flexibility becomes obvious. A clean example for me is Shunguang. A lot of players automatically pair her with characters like Dailin and Zhao because that combination is talked about a lot, and many assume Ye stops performing if those exact teammates aren't available. In reality, Ye's additional ability only requires a support type or defense character to be present for her to gain Qingming's sword stance when an ether veil is activated, and she does not need a specific character to trigger that condition. That distinction becomes clear when you look at how her kit actually works. Ye generates her core resource, Qingming's sword force, through her own actions and from teammates activating ether veils, and accumulating enough of that resource lets her enter her powerful enlightened mind state, where most of her damage potential unlocks. Because of that, you do not need to lock in Dailin or Sunna specifically. Any support or defense agent who can activate an ether veil reliably will satisfy her ability requirements and help her reach enlightened mind faster. Better yet, the reason Zhao keeps showing up as Ye's so-called best in slot is not only because of kit synergy, but because she was already distributed for free, which completely changes how you should evaluate that pairing for real players. In Zenless Zone Zero, accessibility matters just as much as raw performance, and in Ye's case, Zhao being guaranteed means her strongest and most stable enabler is not a gacha bottleneck, but a baseline option almost everyone can field. That effectively locks her in as a practical best in slot partner, not because Ye requires Zhao specifically, but because she cleanly satisfies her additional ability requirements, supports her ether veil interactions consistently, and does so at zero pull cost, which removes the usual trade-off between optimal synergy and account efficiency. In other words, Ye remains flexible in theory, but Zhao's free availability turns one of her best setups into the most realistic and scalable default for the majority of players. Look at what her teammates actually provide. For example, if you have a support agent like Astra, or even in my best example case Pulchra, who contributes meaningful buffs, Ye's own crit and damage output can be tuned around that presence. In Zenless Zone Zero, one of the most practical examples of how flexible team logic actually works is the fully accessible core of Ye Shunguang, Zhao, and Pulchra, because this trio lines up mechanically while also being extremely friendly to free-to-play accounts. Ye's additional ability only cares that a support type or defense character is present on the team, so she does not need any specific premium partner to unlock her core passive value, and Zhao already satisfies that requirement by default while also providing consistent utility and stability for the rotation, which is exactly why she functions as a realistic best-in-slot enabler rather than just a theoretical one. Pulchra then fills the remaining functional gap by giving the team reliable control and setup, which smooths Ye's entry windows and makes it much easier to convert her damage cycles instead of forcing awkward swaps or waiting for enemy openings. What makes this trio especially strong for free players is that Zhao being available at no pull cost removes the usual access barrier for Ye's core condition, while Pulchra offers a low investment way to stabilize tempo through crowd control and setup instead of relying on premium buffers or niche enablers. From a systems perspective, the team works because each slot covers a different requirement layer. Zhao guarantees Ye's passive activation and keeps the rotation safe and consistent. Pulchra handles stun and control, so Ye can operate during favorable windows. And Ye remains the primary damage driver without needing a narrow faction or element lock. The result is a lineup that meets all of Ye Shunguang's mechanical conditions, maintains smooth rotations, and avoids redundant roles, while staying entirely realistic for players who are not pulling heavily. In essence, one of the core strengths of Zenless Zone Zero is that its team-building philosophy never forces you to chase the latest meta unit in order to perform well, with one major exception being Void Hunters. In most other gacha games, top-tier content usually requires very specific character combinations and flagship units to clear late-game content consistently. Zenless Zone Zero intentionally avoids that trap for the broader majority of agents. Many characters who are capable in combat are available without heavy gacha investment, which means you can build functional teams even as a free-to-play player. Zhao, for example, is given for free as a baseline support defense hybrid, which makes her a practical best-in-slot for Ye. This isn't anecdotal. The developers designed early progression so that new players unlock strong foundational agents before they're expected to pull for banners. That alone removes the common pressure to chase a limited roster just to stay viable in standard content. Another part of the accessibility comes from the M2 upgrade system. Unlike some games where a character's optimal performance is gated behind exclusive artifacts or specific teammates, M2 upgrades are universally attainable through consistent gameplay, and they elevate your agent to a point where they can carry independent of premium supports. Void Hunters are the clearest case. They are mechanically set up to be strong solo drivers when fully M2 upgraded, which intentionally makes them rewarding to invest in, like Miyabi, who can anchor entire teams without needing high-rarity partners. My personal experience with Miyabi illustrates this principle neatly. My day one team of Miyabi with Lycan and Sukaku worked because I had the meta supports, but because the game's mechanics allow characters to fulfill their own activation conditions with characters that are themselves highly accessible. With M2, Miyabi already gains the necessary stat scaling and uptime to operate consistently. Lycan provides reliable setup and stun, so Sukaku can fill support so she can deal damage without waiting or relying on a premium buffer. That design perks up again when you observe that Zenless Zone Zero doesn't make elemental or faction requirements unbearably narrow. Many team conditions can be satisfied through more than one route, for example using different support types, different types of control agents, or even flexible utility builds, which encourages experimentation and reduces the pressure to chase one locked-in combo. That's why players can reasonably run off-meta compositions and still clear content that would otherwise be gated behind specific setups in other titles. In practical terms, this accessibility lowers the barrier to entry for new players and keeps long-term progression from feeling like a treadmill of pull this unit or get stuck. Sure, summons matter and banners bring value, but ZZZ's core systems, widespread functional unlocks, scalable M2 upgrades, and adaptable additional ability requirements mean that you can stay competitive by optimizing what you already have rather than constantly chasing what you don't. That's a fundamental part of why veteran players can confidently tell newcomers that team building is flexible. The game actively supports that flexibility with its progression design.